aesthetically, Wakanda is shown to be very African. After all, they've got a mud hut built into the side of a skyscraper, so that's how you know it's African.
No, that's the palace. That's the Brazilian favelas are built into the side of the palace.
Oh my
There are
God.
thatched roofs on skyscrapers. There are dirt roads.
It's activating the part in Americans' brain that recognizes certain aesthetic features that they attribute to Africa.
Yes, foreign fetishism.
And they look at it and they go, "Oh my God, that's Africa," even though it makes no sense. But I got very little idea of the actual culture of Wakanda, and that's either a limitation of the vision of the creators of the film,
Definitely.
or down to the time constraints of the actual runtime of the film.
I don't think so. It was over 2 hours.
Well, it is over 2 hours, but you'll notice that a significant portion of the first half is dedicated to tracking down Claw and the international aspects of that, going to South Korea, for instance, and America, that entails as well. If they had made the film more self-contained, set entirely within Wakanda, not bothered about the international stuff, they could have given themselves more time to explore. And this is both a limitation of the runtime and a mistake of the writers.
They had scenes of his coronation, didn't they? And the M'Baku fight and all the people going upriver to the waterfall. And the
That's a very narrow aspect of the Wakandan culture, though, because that's how the monarchy acts in a very specific situation. I want to...
Hang on, no, I've got to pull you up on that. Okay. Because the most British thing that happened in the last couple of weeks was the Queen's funeral. So if there's a cultural flashpoint, whether it's a coronation or a funeral for a king, and you didn't even have a funeral for the prior king as well.
Well, no.
There's hang on a minute. Right, okay. It's a cultural touchstone. Britishness came out of that in its purest form organically. Meanwhile, the Dora Milaje sort of did a little arse shake on the boat. The creatives didn't put any time or thought into showcasing the best of Wakandan culture on the route to the coronation. It's lazily done. And it reminded me, basically, of when Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats kneeled down for 9 minits for George Floyd wearing the kente cloth, but they didn't realise it was the cloth from a slave-owning tribe. It's all performative.
I agree with all of that. It is all performative, but even of the incredibly thin, surface-level culture that we see, it's incredibly narrow, and only as part of the highest level of the hierarchy do we get to see that. At no point, other than when T'Challa is wandering about the markets, do we get any idea of what life is like for Wakandans on the ground. Other than the fact that they have a monarchy, we have no idea how the country is organised socially speaking.
I think I do, but I've got some thoughts.
Other than there being a bunch of tribes and the people at the top of those tribes, occasionally when there's a new monarch coming in, they challenge each other potentially. Okay, how is society organised? What jobs do most people do? What entertainment do they provide for themselves? Because there's no sense of like advertisements. They don't have gigantic TV screens on the sides of the skyscrapers advertising things. It's an incredibly surface level culture is designed purely so that Black Americans can look at it and go, "Dat Africa."
Yeah, it's an individual artisan style culture, not a consumerist one, because they don't have an international economy to need to do exports. They don't have a consumption mindset. Instead, again, to bring the spectre of Pelosi up, for example, is the very Marxist statement she made where they were talking about, I believe it was the Inflation Reduction Act. And she said, hopefully this should facilitate people to take more time off work to be poets and artists and sculptors and things like that. It's the idea that if you had an abundant resource and people didn't have to work because technology took care of it all for you, you'd have this some wellspring of creativity come forth from everyone, and everyone can just make little baskets they can sell in the market and just enjoy their days, just sitting and drinking tea and conversing and watching things. It's almost like Wally floating in the chairs, but for dressed up in kente cloth. Like that's all it is. It's the Marxist idea of if we had an abundance of resources created by despecified labour and unlocking natural resources, then suddenly everyone would just become a basket weaver and be happy.
And then, as well as all that, because like I say, I can understand how you got that impression. I don't even think there's enough information about Wakandan culture in the film.
I agree with that.
I can understand where you're getting that conclusion, but even then, you're having to fill in a lot of the gaps on how they've got
I spent half an hour staring at that aerial shot of the market without, again, the roads or the pavements and the weird canopy coverage, who planted those trees everywhere.
And that shot lasts in typical modern Marvel fashion for like 3 seconds tops.
If
you got to cut. You got to get those cuts in. But that's another aspect of this, which is that even in ways that these people behave, is very American.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't act at all like any documentaries I've seen of people actually from Africa.
Matt Walsh talking to the Maasai tribe could not be more different than Shuri's insolence and pointing to, what are those? We have to talk about that.
No. Actually, you could even say actually that this appeals to the globalist, because obviously this is a very globalist film. The globalist end of history mindset, the idea
universal
that
man.
Yeah, the universal man. Once a country has reached a certain level of prosperity, even though this isn't a democratic nation, they have all the hallmarks other than the fact that there's a king of a democratic nation.
Well, they have the architectural ugliness of international financial centers with the skyscrapers, but why do you have skyscrapers when you don't have that centralized a population and you don't have any sort of international financial hub connections to need that sort of office space and things like that?
Because like we say, all of the cultural elements that are there are only purely surface level, whereas the actual the actual meat of the way that these people interact with each other is just an individualistic, very casual American way of communicating with one another. I've been watching House of the Dragon recently. I'm on episode 5 at the point of filming this video. And so far that's done, along with watching The Crown as well, they've both done a very good job of showing how in a monarchical system, the king is just as constrained, if not more constrained, than his subjects, because he has traditions to uphold, he has the entire realm to consider, he has political marriages to organise, he's got all this on his plate constantly every time, and everybody needs to adhere to a very rigid method of communicating with one another. You need to keep the airs in there. You need to say your highness, manners. Your grace. Then you need to keep the manners there. Whereas everybody in this that we see interact with T'Challa just treats him like you would imagine to treat your high school teacher if you run into him outside of school. Well, Shuri, hey man, how's it going?
Yeah, Shuri literally films him being thrown across the room in embarrassment.
You're recording?
For research purposes.
Delete that footage.
Like,
that's disrespect that would not be acceptable even from the sister.
No.
Even from the princess.
He'll take off that slipper and chase around the room with it if he were a true African king,
And he'd be right to do so as well. Needs to put her in a place because she is insolent.
Yeah, so the what are those comment we do have to cover.
And what are these?
The real question is, what are those? Why do you have your toes out in my lap?
But you don't like my royal sandals. I wanted to go old school for my first day.
Yeah, I bet the elders loved that.
Because I think that is the most African-American moment of the entire show. Because not only is the meme completely contextually out of place to give a sort of applause, clap, laugh, I know that pointing
it's
moment.
The incredibly exaggerated mannerisms and gesticulation.
It's also a meme that was generated from disrespect to the police.
That doesn't surprise me.
The original video was him during an arrest pointing and going, what are those? The police officer's shoes.
Question for you. What are those?
So, again, I think the subtext of its inclusion here is not just for a whoop and holler moment. It's another thumb in the eye from the BLM style politics that underwrote Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, right the way through to the 2020 riots that were after this film.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.